Yeah, that's live.
Oh, wow. It's just good to be here.
It's great to be here. Great to be here in the year of our Lord, 2025.
Sure. Is
I
this
think this is,
the first from the backcountry episode of 2025?
no, Bond Almond was the first, but this is our first from the Backcountry episode of
Sure.
2025,
Yeah.
which means it's really the first from the Backcountry episode
Sure.
of 2025.
Right, of course.
So we're having you on for a very specific reason today, and that's because you broke the crown jewel of Northeast FKTs.
Yeah, true. My crowning achievement, really.
Yeah. No, so it was a pretty spectacular run. That's why we're talking about it. But you went out over Christmas break and ran the Eastern Trail, which is you can give more details about it, but it's a approximately 100K that goes from Portsmouth, New Hampshire to South Portland, Maine. You can give the breakdown on like sort of what it is, like road versus double track versus single track. But it's a it's a pretty flat trail in the whole grand scheme of trails. Like it's a lot of bike path, a lot of roads. And you blazed it. You ran in like sub 8 minute pace, 7:48 pace as the record shows, and about 8 hours and 33 minutes. So talk a little bit about the Eastern Trail and just paint us the picture.
Sure. Yeah, so the Eastern Trail is a specific segment of what's called the East Coast Greenway. And if you're like on many of the bike paths around, well, in New England, but kind of along the coastline, you'll see these signs with like two trees on them that say East Coast Greenway. The Greenway runs from Florida up to Maine, and it goes beyond, where I ended at Bug Light Lighthouse. The Eastern Trail, is like the southern Maine section that, for whatever reason, has taken on like its own set of signage and its own like segmentation. If you drive up through southern Maine, like towards Portland, kind of the standard highway route, you'll see like a massive sign for like the Eastern Trail as you go through Kennebunk, because the trail crosses over the highway. But so it's this segment of a much, much, much larger thing. And yeah, like Will was saying, super flat, 65 miles. It's really kind of broken up into three-ish sections, I think. The first 20 to 25 miles is kind of rolling hills through southern Maine, and it's really gorgeous. Going through all these like tiny southern Maine towns. You see a ton of horse farms and Christmas tree farms. It's just like really, really cute. And then you get the next 20 miles or so, which is kind of purgatory, because it becomes less interesting terrain. You get a little bit of sort of dirt road track in there, but at least I was left feeling like, where in the world am I? You cross through some more major towns like Biddeford and Saco. And then once you hit Thornton Academy, which is the high school in Saco, then it kind of recaptures a little magic, and it's a lot of dirt track going by these like little beach towns like Pine Point Beach, Old Orchard, that kind of thing, for a bunch of miles. And then you get to Scarborough and South Portland. South Portland is where I'm from, so then I ended up running the last few miles like through the town that I grew up. So
Cool.
it was obviously magical.
Yeah, for sure. It's there's always whenever you can build in running home into an effort, I feel like it's an added motivation.
For sure. Yeah. I was looking for an excuse to run this. but it's hard to justify because it still is like a big day, and it's just a lot of flat ground running. It was like, even though it's not crazy long in comparison to some of the mountain things that, we have done before, it's a lot of pounding on the same muscle groups. So like they really take a beating.
Yep.
But because I was signed up for Black Canyon, which is in February, so a few weeks from now, I kind of felt like I needed to try out something of approximately the same distance, same time. And so I finally had my justification.
Yeah. So what's the breakdown of like what percent's roads, what percent's dirt, what percent's bike path?
It's probably a third like dirt bike path, like rail trail-esque. It's a little bit looser than a lot of the rail trails that I've been on, but about a third. About a third of like kind of state route roads, which are boring, and then about a third like kind of very winding, like narrow rural roads, I guess, that are kind of like weaving in and amongst the woods, but they are paved.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. And yeah, 65 miles. One question I had is that you have yet to submit this to our overlords at fastest known time. When are you going to do that?
I mean, I should have done it right before this episode. I was thinking about it, and it's been purely just an oversight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been crafting your 20,000 word trip report.
I have. It's a long Microsoft Word document.
Yeah. So I guess one big question I have is what you mentioned Black Canyon. What was the thought process behind running a 65 miler in preparation for 100K? Like I don't know, it just seems like I guess in my world, as a multi-day guy, you don't run a 300 miler in preparation for a 300 miler, obviously. But like what was your thought process on running using this as a test piece a couple months out from Black Canyon?
Yeah. Is it a couple things like intention there? Because you're right. Typically, you don't want to like get anywhere close to racing before race day for like the same distance at least. However, I'm like a big believer in the principle that if you can't do it in training, you can't do it on race day. And I wanted to do this because I had never run something that was like 8-ish hours before, that I was like, I had really no idea how to pace that and like where just the natural like low points were going to be. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I have a much better understanding of that now, like doing the Eastern Trail and then training afterwards, like doing some 20, 30, 40 miler type stuff. I feel like I understand how to pace this type of thing a lot better than if I hadn't done the Eastern Trail. And I think also I started training at like a pretty decent level of fitness because I ran a decent marathon in late October, and then took a few weeks off. And the Eastern Trail is like my 4th week of training for Black Canyon. Mm-hmm. And I still had 2 full months before Black Canyon, so I felt like I both had the fitness to do it decently well and had the time to recover. But it was more a novelty thing. I think that really made me feel like I had to do it.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. When you've never paced something, I feel like pacing is such a big thing. When you've never paced something like that before and you don't necessarily know how to pace it, I feel like there's nothing else that can prepare you for that other than doing it and figuring it out. And you'd rather make the mistakes on the Eastern Trail than at Black Canyon.
Well, right. Like for you, like, the things multi-day stuff, doing like the Diartissima so early, like you learned in that experience, like how to pace things to be able to replicate like the same effort day over day over day. I mean, and through hike, the AT is like that too.
Sure.
Like you got to learn how to pace the race at some time.
Yeah, definitely. So talk me through the logistics of this. Like who was out there? What was the setup? What was your support like?
Yeah. So it was mostly just me and my mom out there. She was nice enough to kind of drive with me throughout the day and hand me a lot of bottles. The nice thing about this that you wouldn't get at like any race or FKT was that, at least without like major pacer support, was like she could meet me every like 45 minutes or something and hand me a new bottle. So I don't really have to carry very much at all. So she was out there all day, and then I had Lila Gaudreau from Cape Elizabeth, so the town over from my hometown, who has the women's record and second fastest time on this. It's 40-ish minutes behind mine. She ran like 8 miles with me, pretty close to the start, and then came to see me at the finish as well, which was super, super nice of her. And then I had a buddy from high school who, like, I texted at like 5 a.m. the morning of, because some other buddies from high school bailed on running with me, and I was like, dude, you got to get up here on the bike. Like, I'm gonna need this. And so he was timed and did like the last set with me on the bike.
Sure. Yeah, that's sweet. And how did so you're sort of using this as a test piece of how do I pace 100K? What did you learn along that path?
Yeah, so going into it, I thought that, like 8 hours, that's not really that much, like as soon as things start to get hard, you're basically at the end. But like the time scale versus like intensity of the running does not work that way. Like 3 hours at 100K pace does not feel very close. Unlike
Sure.
like the 100-mile wilderness or something with a much longer time scale, 3 hours feels like you're right there at the end.
Sure.
3 hours feels like a really long ways to go. And so I think that I learned the importance of starting out, like just taking what your body gives you. Like it never becomes easier to move smoothly than at the start. And if you're running this kind of thing, like very flat, runnable, where the buildup of fatigue is like on the same muscles, you're not jumping around, like you can't really hike without giving up a ton of time. Like you kind of have to start out very fast and know that you're going to fade at some point. So for me, like that meant I went out comfortably hard at like 7:15s to 7:25s. And like there's an argument to be made that maybe I should have just like run 8s and then negative split. But running 8s is still like pretty hard for 30 miles. And like you have to like
Sure.
you have to make the gamble that like after that you're going to be able to run 7:30s for 30 miles.
Right.
Where it's like you could run, let's say 7:30s for the first 30 and then run 8s for 20 and then like get a little bit back in the last 10. And like that's kind of the more natural progression. And I know that's how a lot of 100Ks have raced out west, and I hadn't paced something like that before, and I wanted to see how that felt. And like I understand the validity of that strategy now. I understand why they do it that way.
Sure, interesting. Yeah, because I was gonna follow up with this is sort of a tension point that you and I have talked about. A lot of people that we know who are good in the 100K space seem to start really hot and then fade quite hard at the end. Obviously, there's a tension there because if you fade too hard, then it's like pretty detrimental to your time.
Yeah.
Like, how do you try to strike that balance between like this? It seems like the best strategy is to go out relatively hard and accept that you're going to fade a little bit at the end, but you need to make sure that you don't just completely blow up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably, like, biologically, it has to do with how close you're running to, like, your lactate threshold. Because if you're running at kind of a tempo effort, let's say for the first 2 hours, where your heart rate is, like, around 150, you're certainly incurring damage on your body. But when you slow down, when you, like, naturally fade, you can kind of recover and then get something back for the end. Whereas if you're up over your lactate threshold, you're probably just going to have carnage in the second half. So I think, you know, people's success with that strategy depends on how hard they're running that first part, and whether it's over lactate threshold or under.
Sure. And so, what was the moment during the Eastern Trail where you felt like, man, this is becoming hard. The running isn't smooth anymore, and how did you sort of fight through that? Because I would imagine, just based on our conversation so far, I would imagine that point was like not as far in as you thought it might be, and so like how do you come to grips with like, man, I'm like things are starting to hurt, and I still have whatever it is 3 hours to go. Like,
Yeah.
What was that point like for you, and how'd you get through it?
Yeah, so early in 2024, I ran 40 miles at the same pace, at 7:48 pace. And I was like very proud of that at the time. And so I kind of thought I can probably run the first 35 to 40 at 7:30 to 7:40 pace. And I think that's pretty much how it turned out. But I think that I started to fall off of the pace around the 50K mark, so pretty much halfway.
Mm-hmm.
The Eastern Trail is unforgiving at that point because the like route becomes much less interesting, like right after the first marathon. And so when a well-trained athlete, you know, like is naturally going to start to fade a little bit, like the route also like gives you nothing in return for your efforts. Like,
Sure.
you're just like, it all looks the same. It's no longer like the pretty stuff. And the Biddeford and Saco sections are like gross. It's the only like major towns that you have to work your way through, but there are a couple like big like kind of state routes that you have to like work through the lights to get through, and a couple like industrial parks, like not fun. But so the moment that it got hard was like the 50K mark. And I think you can see that pretty well in like my Strava like mileage. Things start to fall apart there, and I start to run like 8:15s, and then it slows down pretty considerably to like 8:30s over the next 20 or so.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit less maybe, but yeah, it got really hard. And through this whole training block, I haven't been using like music at all, but I told myself that I could use music for this, and so I did for like 3 hours after the 50K mark. Kind of until the last like 10 or so, went to meet my high school friend on the bike.
Is not using music during training an intentional like deprivation of good things so that you can, sort of the way I deprive myself of caffeine going up to an effort, so that the caffeine is rocket fuel? Like, is that what you do with music, so that when you do need the music, it like helps you, or do you just not like training with music?
It's more that I used to love training with music. Like, I got really dependent on it early in 2024. And so, like, Vermont 100, I had a lot of things go wrong at Vermont 100, but they, like, say no headphones at all.
Interesting.
And I remember getting through, like, 15 miles and being like, oh, my God, I can't do this. This is horrible. But I, like, kept using music through the Hartford Marathon in October. And there again, you know, I just don't think it's like incredible form to use music if you're like kind of near the front of these races. I mean, that's like my personal opinion. Like, I think you should be like focusing on like the racing element.
That's interesting. I've never.
Yeah,
never
some people might think that that's kind of like a hot take, but whatever. But so that was hard. Even just like a, you know, little bit under 3 hours, like marathon without music was really difficult. And so for this block, it was like the only time that you can use music is doing like strength training or on the treadmill, because those things are so heinous already.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you, does Black Canyon allow music?
I think that they do, actually. Yeah. So
All right.
I'll like,
Thanks.
the crazy thing is, like, I carry my headphones on every run.
Even though you're not listening to music?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I do allow myself to like talk on the phone with my parents.
Okay. Yeah.
And so sometimes I do that, but like even when I'm not doing that, I still carry the headphones.
Yeah.
Yeah. In case it
That's
just
interesting.
becomes so horrible.
So unbearable.
Yeah.
That's interesting. One thing I've sort of noticed in your trajectory as an athlete is that the efforts that you've gone after have consistently over the past couple of years gotten like less vert heavy, you could say. Do you think that's a reflection of your training and sort of what you're forced to run day to day in the great city of New York? You know, like I guess my question is like, if you lived in Maine or Vermont or whatever, do you think you'd still be primarily focused on mountain technical things, or do you think that your heart is like naturally more in the like runnable fast stuff?
I think it's mostly a product of the environment. Like, I think that there's a lot of stuff that if I lived in Portland or Conway or Montpelier or something, like, that I would want to do in the mountains that I just really can't do. And see, early 2024 is a good example. I was hoping to do a bunch of stuff in the mountains, and I was on the stair stepper, was on the incline treadmill, and felt really, really good about like my pure climbing ability. I felt like I was the best climber that I had ever been, but it just doesn't like super translate unless you can put the time in on the terrain, I find. So yeah, if I was up there, I'd be more interested in racing like Jigger Johnson, or, you know, various FKT routes up there.
Yeah.
But it's really hard.
Yeah, I wonder if there's Bill. So Bill seems to think that like regardless of technicality, that your climbing pace is essentially the same as long as it's over like 15% grade or whatever he says.
Mm-hmm.
And that I'm not gonna say I disagree with him, but when I'm on the stair stepper, I can climb at 50 feet per minute indefinitely at below 130 heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm on something like the long trail, 50 feet per minute is 3,000 feet per hour. When I'm on the long trail, even with full support, I'm averaging, I think Bill said, around 2,500 feet an hour, maybe 2,600. So there's like definitely a penalty in there for being on an actual mountain. It seems, at least based on my anecdotal data,
Yeah.
it seems like there's a penalty. It seems like it doesn't directly translate, and I'm not sure why. I would assume it would be the technicality. Also, like, in the mountains, you're probably more like the slope. You're not always stepping on like a perfect step, so maybe you're like more calf reliant, whereas on a stair stepper you can be more quad reliant. I don't know. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just put that all under the umbrella of like an efficiency like penalty. Like you can be really efficient on the incline treadmill or on the stairmaster, and Bill's thought might actually hold up like between trails.
Sure.
Like the efficiency penalty might not be crazy different if you're on the long trail versus going up Washington or going up Katahdin or whatever. But simply the fact of being on a trail like carries a big efficiency penalty that requires getting used to.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, people tell me all the time, like, oh, like, you can get to the Catskills, like you can get to Bear Mountain, and like they're right. But it's a big strain on like scheduling. So like they're not wrong.
How far is Bear Mountain? I always picture Bear Mountain being like the Fells, but I don't know if it's actually that close.
It's like an hour away from Manhattan.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah.
I feel like half an hour is a sweet spot where you can get there like all the time, but driving an hour is certainly, it's not like I feel like an hour away is sort of like a max once or twice a week kind of thing, which just isn't super sufficient.
I mean, yeah, it's really hard with school and with like a fiance and stuff, like who's also working and like demanding job. Like, I mean, it's difficult. It's one of the reasons that Black Canyon was so appealing, was that it is a genuine trail race.
Mm-hmm.
And it has climbing, but it is not the type of thing that like requires you to get into like that northeast trail efficiency where you have to deal with so many roots and rocks. It is more of it's closer to a pure run, just like really winding. And
so why, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of 100Ks out west that are not overly technical. What about Black Canyon specifically drew your interest?
Yeah, well, if you buy the hike train that goes on out west, Black Canyon is the probably the most competitive like ultra in North America.
Didn't the guy who just won Trail Runner of the Year, didn't he win it last year? Didn't he win Black Canyon? I thought Hayden Hawks just won like either Ultra Runner of the Year or Trail Runner of the Year.
Well, yes, Hayden Hawks did win Black Canyon last year. So
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a product of a few things. Like, I mean, Western States is obviously exceptionally competitive, but Black Canyon is a golden ticket race, and it gets you in the lottery for both Western States and UTMB. Like, it gets you in the lottery for pretty much everything that you'd want to get into. The other golden ticket races have only 2 tickets. Black Canyon has 3, so like you just get a even more like competitive runners trying to do it. And the permitting for the trail is like really generous. Like there's essentially no cap on the number of people who can run. So like you can, if you're a good runner and you find yourself like in pretty good shape on January 1st, you can just sign up for Black Canyon and like put your hat in the ring for a golden ticket to Western States.
Yeah, that's really nice. One thing, frustrating thing I found trying to dip the toes into the race scene is that all of the race registrations seem to be like 10 months out from the race, and that's just, like, who knows? I don't know what my schedule is 10 months from now. That's
right.
It seems kind of ridiculous, but that's cool that Black Canyon is.
I mean, it's kind of an anomaly in that way. Like most other like 100 milers or 100Ks are not like that.
Yeah.
But so the competition, the golden tickets, like drew me in. I kind of, I went out and scouted the Black Canyon course last week.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell the folks.
Yeah, I mean it's super different from like Northeast running. It's definitely its own style. Um, One of the more interesting parts about it is that like everything is just so gradual, right? Like it's so switchbacky. And like I'd hiked in Colorado and California before, and even with the switchbacks, things were still pretty steep. They were just at like a really even grade.
Mm-hmm.
But on the Black Canyon Trail, um, the switchbacks like make everything exceptionally gradual. There's very little like actual steep stuff. Like the trail like follows the contour lines that you can see on like Gaia or on a physical map, I guess.
Sure.
Like really, really well. But that makes it exceptionally like windy. And so the big challenge is that you are like forced to like kind of hammer the straightaways, and then like slow down pretty aggressively and then speed right back up. So a Carolina would actually be like very good training for
Oh,
for black.
we gotta inform the people of what a Carolina is.
Go ahead.
I gotta pull it up because I always get the exact numbers wrong. But keep talking about Black Canyon while I pull it up.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Black Canyon is a really fast like 100K. It's also not at altitude, so which is also kind of like unique for races out west. So like a lot of people can run it. It's a net downhill of about 2,000 feet, which like contributes to it being really fast. But it still has like 5,000, 6,000 feet of climbing depending on the watch.
Yep. That's still a decent amount of vert.
Yeah, it's like close to 100 feet per mile.
Yeah. Okay, so I pulled up a Carolina. So a little background: a Carolina is a fitness exercise that my high school soccer coach came up with. I don't know where he got it, but it's like essentially a modified suicide. I think like it's in the same realm, and so the format of a Carolina is you start with 20-yard sprints and you do it 16 times. And for each 20, you give yourself 7 seconds to run and rest. So like you're not like if you're running the 20 yards in 7 seconds, right? You're running it wrong because you're not running hard enough. It is like a sprint, but then you don't start the next sprint until 7 seconds have gone by. All right, so you do the 16 20-yard sprints, and then you rest for 2 minutes, and then you do 12 40-yard sprints, and you have 14 seconds to run and rest for each of the 40s. Another 2-minute rest. Then you run 10 60-yard sprints, 21 seconds per for running and resting. Another 2-minute rest. 8 80-yard sprints, 28 seconds per for running and resting. One more 2-minute rest, and then lastly you do 600-yard sprints with 35 seconds per for running and resting. And so a whole Carolina only takes like 15-20 minutes, but it is the most electric and suffering 15 to 20 minutes in all of sports. And honestly, I think it's a great exercise for working on just like, I don't know, suffering or probably speed, but I feel like it's a good thing to supplement if you're a big zone 2 guy and you just hang out in zone 2 all the time. It's a great quick add-on that you can do to get a lot of benefit in the upper end.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, so I actually hadn't thought about Carolinas like before talking about this, but like if you're doing something where you have to like stop and start a lot, like the Carolina like emphasizes that is actually like the really, really hard part, because like your sprinting pace, like for all of these reps, like you could probably actually keep it up for like a 400 meter like dash if you wanted to, like, which is over 4 times the length of your longest rep here. Like maybe you could keep up close to that pace for like 4x400, like a classic interval session.
Sure.
The stopping and starting makes it so brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is brutal. And I mean, I think the reason he did that is because soccer is a lot of quick starts and stops at high energy. Uh, but I mean, I think it helps for trail running too. Like there's a lot of, at least in my world, there's a lot of like you do a quick push up like a 10-foot rock face, and your heart is gonna get a little up, and then you need it to go back down. Um,
I like kind of take into this concept of like heart rate like being sticky, right? Like for well-trained athletes, like running at like a steady state pace, like your heart rate will increase, right? If I'm running 6-minute pace, over time my heart rate is going to slowly rise from like let's say 145 to 160. It'll take a long time for that to happen, but like stickiness, the length of time that it takes for it to increase through that range, like seems to be like kind of a concept that you'd want to phone in on, right? Like
Sure.
you're not going to avoid your heart rate rising like that, but the longer you can extend that clock, would be great. But I think like the Carolina is like a really good way to improve that because you're like constantly going up and down, like kind of within that range. Like your heart rate is never going to be 175 plus, right? It's just like always going to be going in between 140 and 160.
right. Yeah. Yeah, the Carolina's magic. It's
Yeah.
the most electric 15 minutes in sports.
But the most brutal part is that you actually only yield like less than a mile and a half of running, and your average pace is like 11 minutes.
Yeah, all the resting really kills the pace, and like, yeah, if you look at it on a Strava file, it just looks so unimpressive.
Yeah, that's the most brutal part for sure. Who knows?
Oh,
Maybe
man.
maybe I'll throw in a couple during the taper.
Yeah, you should. You should. I mean, you should if you want to win. If you don't, then yeah.
They've always kind of been like a spring, summertime like supplement for me. Like for whatever reason, I can't bring myself to do it when it's 20 degrees outside.
I actually feel like I never thought about it before, but I do all of my Carolinas in the spring,
Yeah.
and then never again.
Yeah.
It's something about the optimism of the spring that,
Yeah.
that lets you do hard things.
Yeah. Who knows?
Uh,
Maybe I'll book
yeah.
a friend.
yeah. Speaking of Strava, you've taken on a bit of a Strava personality in the last.
Yeah, how would you describe that personality?
Like you're like trying to placate your audience, but also you're also not. Like you're writing Strava captions as if you're expecting people to really care about them, and then just get no kudos every time.
Well, I will say, I think that my yield on kudos is very good, actually, because I actually have like a very like low Strava profile. I have like,
Sure.
I think a little bit over 100 followers and follow like 50 or something. And so when I get 25 kudos, like that's a 25% yield.
That's true. That's a big yield.
Yeah. That's, yeah, dude, people care about the content. I also like can't, not that I can't stand it, but I think that captions should be either completely ridiculous or morning run. Like those are the two options.
Sure. Yeah, I've sort of gone the route of either a ridiculous caption or just like a factual description of what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I agree. I don't need to hear about how your dog is doing.
Got him. Yeah, so I have taken on a bit of a like eccentric Strava personality. I was on like a big thin rig financial regulation kick during finals. People really loved that one.
Oh yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did. Your numbers are great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like every time that I introduce like a new concept, like the other day, I did like a 19-20 mile run with 2 sets of like 1 minute on, 1 minute off. So and like in my training plan, I was like, this is a like heavy stimulus day. And so I started to write out heavy stimulus. And then I was like, well, what if I write heavy stimulant? And then my kudos numbers went in the toilet.
It's creative stuff, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a lot of law references and allegories, you might say.
Yes. Yeah.
Explaining your runs in terms that the common man can understand.
Right. Right.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't already follow Xander, go follow him on Strava. It's a great read.
Yeah.
He's got the best Strava captions in the business.
Yeah, I would love to hear people's honest opinions, and they will not be taken into account. That's right. Captions.
That's sweet. I think you also, before we got rolling, said that you had some opinions about the Eastern Trail as a concept that you wanted to discuss on the pod.
I think that like the Eastern Trail is kind of the line of like what should be on the FKT website. Like the Eastern Trail has its own signage. Like it is a like well-known bike path, gets like a lot of usage. Like people refer to it as the Eastern Trail. If you like drive on, roads parallel to whatever the major highway is going up to Portland from New Hampshire, you will see a lot of signs for the Eastern Trail. Like it's a real route. It deserves to be run, but it's not the same, and not in the same like spirit of FKT, I think, as a lot of the stuff in the Whites or like the Grafton Notch Loop or the Long Trail, like these kind of like legacy, like trail running, hardcore race routes.
Sure.
Right? Like this, it doesn't have like a long history, but it is like super well defined. And I think that it's a, like, if you were to ask yourself, like, should this be an FKT route? Say, how does this compare to the Eastern Trail? Does it have its own signage all the way through? Does it get a ton of use by people of, all fitness types, all activity types? Just do a quick comparison. If it's on one side of the line, like submit. If it's on the other side, don't submit.
That's great. That's a very great clippable moment.
Yeah.
That's going to be a YouTube short in short time.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, like, sort of, what is your, if you were the head of FKT, what would your criteria be for accepting a route? Like, would you have it written out on the website compared to the Eastern Trail?
Yes, in all ways. No, but I think that there is like a couple criteria would be like lay understanding or like lay usage, right? Like a lot of the stuff in the Whites like deserve to be there because there's so many just like people going out for a day hike are going to like be aiming to hit a certain segment of an FKT route, whether they know it or not. So like there's a lay understanding component. There's an aesthetics component. Like, does the route actually make sense? I think that there's like a definitional component. It gets kind of tricky with like the open route options, like the Adirondack 46 or the 48. But like having extensive signage saying like this is the route for this trail, I think means a lot.
How would you handle really short routes that are often also Strava segments. For example, like a lot of the single mountain, like would you have a single mountain FKT on the board for every New Hampshire 48 mountain?
No.
I'm just trying to, I'm not saying I probably wouldn't either. I'm just trying to figure out, like, those are very defined. Those get a lot of traffic. Those have signage,
Yeah.
where,
Well, you could throw in like a prominence factor into the ones that deserve to have it, right? Like North Twin. No, not yes, North Twin. Like is like a bump that just happens to be 1.1 miles away and like 250 feet like a valley, like away from South Twin. Like it's not prominent at all.
I mean, it's prominent enough to be its own mountain.
Barely, right? But like, but to like warrant a single mountain FKT route, like perhaps the prominence factor has to be, higher,
Sure,
100 feet or something.
Sure.
But
That's interesting.
I think you bring up examples like that. I think that you could actually you probably could quantify a standard.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So I feel like we haven't talked enough about the Eastern Trail. I don't know what else is there about the Eastern Trail. I mean, it doesn't have a long history, but it's got some names on it. Like Lila is obviously an up and comer, and she's winning a lot of things outright. Danny, I if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that Danny wouldn't call his Eastern Trail like the proudest thing he's ever done. But I could be wrong about that. But
no, that's true. Yeah.
I think that Danny's done a lot of cool stuff. So what do you think? Here's a question. What do you think is like the ceiling for the Eastern Trail in terms of like, not in terms of, okay, if the best 100K runner in the world came and ran it, but in terms of realistically, how fast do you see this going with sort of the number of people that will ultimately go after it?
It's a good question. First, Lila is like super, super fast.
Yeah.
It's pretty absurd. Like, when I got to like the 40-mile mark of this, I was like, okay, like if the wheels don't come off, like I should be able to get under her time. But like it really wasn't given, right? Like it, and she ran it like 2 or 3 years ago. Like she's faster, stronger now than she was then, and I felt like I was like, pretty fit for this type of like, for this type of objective. I mean, what like. Her time is really fast, and like I think that she could, run a similar time to what I did, if she wanted to. I think though that reasonably, it like the margins to beat my time are pretty small. If somebody takes off 30 seconds a mile, runs 7:15s,
Sure.
They just run 8 hours, right? Like that's not a huge break either.
Sure.
So I think that it probably tops out, and 7:15s is a crazy fast 100K. So I think it probably tops out around
in the
8
low
hours,
eights,
maybe
yeah.
7:45.
Sure.
But there's not that many people who, one, could run 7:15s or 7 flats for 100K. And how many of those people are going to be running the Eastern Trail as opposed to something else? Like almost nobody's going to be treating it as an A race, right? So
Sure.
it's going to be in service of something else. most of the people who have the ability to run, let's say 7 flats for 100K, are probably doing this like for a living, and could run 100K like that has higher utility for their end goal.
Sure.
Right, like they could go out to the Black Canyon Trail and spend a week there instead of running the Eastern Trail.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's all correct. I think, yeah, the low 8 sound right.
Yeah.
Lila is another one of those people. It's like her and Blonde Almond are two people that I follow on Strava just because every time I see one of their activities, it makes me just go, they're like so ridiculous. Like Lila's running like 120 plus miles every single week with anywhere from 12 to 20,000 feet of vert every single week. How do you maintain that?
I have no idea. I really don't. I mean, I think it's undeniable that she trades off volume for intensity. That means that she is like an extremely low variance runner. Like she can consistently get a very good product, like out of herself from start to finish over a lot of different like race ranges, right? Because she's just so strong and can run all the miles that she needs to.
Yeah.
Which is a huge virtue, and she likes to race a lot. So it makes a lot of sense. But like in comparison, I hit 100 miles last week, and then today, like I went through this week thinking, oh, I'm gonna like hit 100 miles again. I'm just like totally worked today, and like I guess could have suffered through 8 more miles, but like, you know, I tapped out at 92, and she's ripping 30 more miles a week, every week.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's just crazy. Yeah.
It's hard to believe. But I mean, she's so strong, right? And like, perhaps that's a reason why she can race really, really well, very consistently. And I have like 3 great race days, if that, every year.
Sure. Yeah. I feel that, man. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up here, a few things. One, because I know you love this question, what's next after Black Canyon? 2, any hot takes? Because I did like my own Northeast wrap up for FK for like the Northeast scene 2024, and then I did the episode with Jack and Finn, but I haven't, the podcast people haven't heard any of your hot takes for 2025 or 2024 for the FKT scene.
Sure.
So I want to give your thoughts on either of those two topics.
Yeah, so I mean, the first question is a little bit unfair because Will and I have been talking a bunch, and he's been trying to get me to commit to things later in the summer.
This man is dialed in on Black Canyon. I can't shake him off it.
Yeah, and I really want to have like a no tomorrow like mentality at Black Canyon, in part because like, you know, if things go incredibly well, then something will get put on the calendar that, you know, I don't really want to mess with. But second, I feel like the summer for me involves like graduating from law school and bar prep and onboarding to the law firm that I'm going to be working at. And I don't have an incredible picture of what that's going to be like. There's some intriguing things. Like I would love to go back to Vermont 100 and just be in better shape for it and be better prepared. But Vermont 100 is at like a difficult time of the summer. It's like mid-July. It becomes very difficult to do something big either before or after in sort of the traditional mid-June to late August, like summer window.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really want to use any like mental energy figuring that out. So, Vermont 100 definitely weighs on my mind, and I think that I could train decently well for it if if it came down to it, but who knows?
Not me.
Just who knows? I mean, Will wants me to say that I'll go into the 100-mile wilderness again.
Yeah, I do want you to say that.
And break 24, and there's a non-zero chance of that happening.
Right.
But, to be figured out in the third week of February.
Yep. And then any hot takes for either 2024 or predictions for 2025 in the FKT scene?
I got a good one too, I think.
I
think
I'm looking forward to it.
If you look at our list of top 10 routes in the Northeast, I think that under 2.5 routes on the men's side get broken in 2025.
Interesting.
I think on the women's side, over 5.5 routes get broken.
Oh, interesting. Would you, when you're quantifying routes getting broken, if one route got broken multiple times, would that be multiple?
Oh, good question. I was not accounting for that.
Okay, so just the route itself.
Yeah, the route gets a new SDT.
Okay, interesting. Now I'm trying to think what action there could. I mean, you're probably right. The men's side in the Northeast is like kind of dead unless David Sinclair does some stuff. Well, it's pretty sad.
Yeah. No, I think that there's been like an exodus, like a lot of people who have been competitive at a bunch of the FKT stuff, during COVID, have like gone elsewhere on the men's side.
Yeah.
And there's a few things that are vulnerable that like times are really stout and whatever. On the women's side, it's not that times aren't stout, but the concentration of competition that like hit the men's side like 2-3 years ago, I think we started to see that hit the Northeast in 2024, and it's like a lot of people coming from collegiate like track cross country backgrounds, like taking a crack at some things and getting higher concentration of athletes like on some of the routes. So I think a lot of them will go down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you on the women's side. That'll be over 5.5. Actually, man, that's a big ask. 6 of the 10 going down.
It is, yeah. But I mean, you think about Lila, Lauren Gregory.
Is Lauren Gregory going to race FKTs?
I mean, she should.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Kurtz should do the Prezi. I've stopped believing at this point.
Yeah, like Abby Bennett, like this. There's a lot of really fast women who like ran really well this year, or last year in FKTs and in like the White Mountain Endurance Cup.
Yeah,
who I think will be looking for at least like one big FKT this year, and I think they'll have.
No, it's interesting. We saw quite a few go down on our list, the 20 to 25 or the 11 to 25 range.
Mm-hmm.
We just didn't see it happen in the top 10 very much. So that will be interesting. I think I'm gonna go the opposite on you. I think I'm gonna go under 5.5 on the women's side because I think it's gonna be either 4 or 5.
Sure.
And then I think I'm gonna go over on the men's side because I see a very plausible world where unsupported 100-mile wilderness goes down by someone because there's like 7 people going for it apparently.
Yeah.
Unsupported 100-mile wilderness goes down. Someone finally breaks my diartissima time.
You've been saying that for years. But...
And then David Sinclair does something.
Sure.
That's easy 3 right there.
No, I think that there's a bunch on the men's side that are vulnerable, but I think that they're all hard gets and logistically difficult.
Sure.
Except for David Sinclair doing something. That's a high yield savings account right there.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, Jack doesn't stand a chance against that guy. He's just far better than him.
Sure.
Just kidding, Jack.
Yeah, no, those are our fair wagers. Maybe we should put a little cash on it.
I don't know if we can bet on this podcast. Is
What
that
do you mean?
but
ESPN does it all the time.
ESPN has gambling licenses, I would imagine. Well, I'll bet you 5 cases of Diet Mountain Dew on
Oh, don't say that, Skip.
on each of those wagers.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, that's my bold prediction for 2025. But yes, I mean, near and dear to our hearts is the drama on the 100-mile wilderness, particularly the unsupported. I sent this to Will yesterday. Somebody actually commented this past week on the site saying that they were going to go after it. So James Flannery, if you're listening, feel free to reach out. He at least, I think, solicited info in that.
Yeah.
But
And then
so.
we know at least outside of James Flannery, I think we know at least 5 other people that are planning it.
Yeah.
So there's 6 bare minimum that are planning on trying the 100-mile wilderness. I truly think I texted this to you a few days ago maybe, but I think there's a good case to be made that right now the 100-mile wilderness is the most competitive route in the Northeast. Just in terms of pure amount of people interested in going after it.
Yeah.
It's
It's interesting because it's so remote and hard to get to.
Yeah. That's cool.
But
I love it.
I do think that it taps a through hiker thing that appeals to a lot of people for the unsupported style. And I mean, at least I think it's a really attractive supported thing to go after. If you can get the people out there.
It's a cool logistical challenge.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's our quota for the 100-mile wilderness. Talking about it every episode. We've hit our quota.
Yeah.
Straight up. All right. So, anything else you want to say about the Eastern Trail before we sign off here?
No. It's really fun. I think people should try it out. I think doing the full 65 is brutal, but it's really a joy to run that TA section to Bug Light and those first 20 miles for sure. So this is if you have any interest in beautiful Maine running, you should just get out there and try the trail. I think get on a portion of it. I think it's a great thing. You see a lot of people out there.
For sure. Cool, man.
You can follow me on Strava for a great.
Yeah, I was about to say. Follow Xander Strava, immaculate content. Follow him on Instagram at xkeiter2 if you want to see him post once every 2 years.
As the people do.
Yep, and then maybe someday he'll upload it to the FKT website.
Maybe.
But yeah, all right, man. Well, good luck at Black Canyon. Yeah, I feel like we can just throw the gauntlet down now. I feel like a podium at Black Canyon means another episode.
Sure. Yeah. So it would take a big day, but it's possible.
All right. Yeah, I believe.
Big day.
All right, man. We'll chat later.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right.
It's fun.
Peace.